So I just saw the new Five Nights at Freddy's movie, which reminded me a lot of that old Slender Man movie that came out a couple years ago, in the sense that this movie is about 10 years a little too late.
Kept you waiting, huh?
So Five Nights at Freddy's, it stars this dude who was in the Hunger Games and a couple other people that I don't really recognize from anything else, and it's of course a movie that is based on the extremely, or what I guess used to be, extremely popular Five Nights at Freddy's video game. If you're over the age of 25 and don't know what Five Nights at Freddy's is, essentially it's this horror game where you play as a security guard in this place, and these gigantic animatronic animal things kind of try to kill you, I guess, is the best way to put it. I never played it, it was never really my thing, but I always knew that there was some sort of, like, lore to this game that really got people excited, lore that led to other games and movies, or animated movies, I think, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, and books, and just, like, a whole bunch of, like, you know, web series, and a bunch of different things, and tons of big YouTubers, like, people go nuts over the lore for this stuff, and now we have a feature film. Produced by Jason Blum, who's like the king of making weird-ass movies like this, but also the king of making movies that are not very good, but not terrible, and I think that's the category I'd put this movie in. It's extremely safe, it's not terrible, but it's also just, like, not good? So let me get into it. The first thing I'm going to talk about some stuff that I did like, and I do want to talk about the scares, because this movie isn't very scary for a large portion of it, and I'm not sure it was exactly trying to be, but there are small stretches near the beginning of the second act specifically that actually, like, tap into what made the original game, I think, somewhat scary. The ideas from the game actually translating into the movie, and this one sequence worked really, really well. I thought it was done really, really well. It made the characters feel isolated, it made the whole situation feel isolated, and I thought it was well done. And that's one of the issues with this movie with the scares, is I feel like the movie's not scary because it forgets to isolate the characters, and something that works about the game, at least my memory of it, is the fact that you feel like you're alone. You're alone in this gigantic building filled with these things that are trying to kill you and that are stalking you, and that's what makes it scary. The moment that you add a companion into the game, or a companion into the room with you, and it becomes 2, 3, sometimes even 4 people, it's just not as scary. So all the moments in this movie where it was just one person experiencing something, I thought the scares did work, and the mystique of what these animatronics are and what they're doing and how they're stalking them, I thought was done really well, but it's just very, very, very small parts of this movie. A lot of this movie is just not scary at all, which makes it sort of boring. That's my big issue with this movie, is it's just so boring. The first act of this movie has the same problem that I thought Exorcist Believer had. It just had nothing going on. It tried to get you hooked and interested in this character and his life, but unfortunately it's just so cookie cutter and so down to basics that there's really nothing there that's overwhelmingly good, and it just comes off as boring, because at the end of the day, you're going to see a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. What do you want to see? You want to see a guy, you know, being the security guard and having these big monster animatronic things stalk him. That's what you want to see. You want to get to the scares. And this movie just takes, like, way too long to get to it, which is just the most unfortunate part about it, because there is potential in there, in this movie, that you could see to make a really good horror movie, but this first act is just such a slog, and unfortunately the movie never really comes back from it. And this main character here, I could not even tell you his name, I forgot his name from the movie, but he's just a very generic character, and, like, there is, like, a nice little story here about this, you know, his little sister, he's taking care of her, his parents had died, you assume, and then, like, at some point in his life, his brother had been kidnapped, so there's some traumas there, and it's about responsibility, and it's trying to tackle some pretty mature and some pretty heartwarming themes, but I just don't think it really works because the character, like I said, is just so boring. I will say the third act of this movie does ramp up in a way that does get a little interesting, or at the very least exciting. It plays around with some interesting themes, and it definitely introduces some things that I wasn't expecting, and I thought some of them were entertaining, some of them didn't work at all for me, and some of them just kind of fell flat on their face. Like, it was just absolutely terrible. But I think for the most part, a lot of what they were going for in the third act was actually a good idea. It was just the execution wasn't 110% there. This movie did have a good soundtrack, I'll give it that. There were some songs that played where I was like, hey, it's a good choice. And the production design, listen, I will give them complete credit. First off, on the animatronics, these things look amazing. I'm assuming that most of the time these things are practical, and they did build practical animatronics, and they look freaky and very accurate to what I remember from the games. And the sets themselves, you know, the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria or whatever, the whole thing looked creepy, it looked eerie, and I enjoyed that. The little office that, you know, was the main inspiration for the game, that little office that you spend the entire game in, it was really creepy and really effective. I just wish they spent more time, like, locked in the office, like in the game, because that's what's scary, being locked in this office as these things are trying to get in and trying to get to you. Like, that's what, to me, at least, that's what's freaky. But yet again, it's just the script in this movie is really safe, it's really basic, it doesn't try doing anything like really creative or anything, and that's something that a lot of Jason Blum produced movies do, and every now and then Jason Blum will produce a movie that ends up doing, being amazing, and just being kind of original, but for the most part, what Jason Blum's job is at his studio is to just make a ton of horror movies, and a lot of the time he takes these big, franchise idea, Five Nights at Freddy's, I mean, this guy made a Truth or Dare movie, he takes these things that should be big franchises, and he makes very, very safe movies that aren't going to be terrible, movies that are going to be good enough to please and appease a general audience, a young audience, which is really what I think this movie's going to target. Have those movies make a ton of money, and then create franchises, and to that, I don't blame him, and he's going to be successful at it. This movie, I think, is going to make a lot of money. I know it's released on Peacock, but I think people are going to see it in theaters. At least my theater was full, and I do think, like, kids that at least love the games, I think are going to enjoy this movie. This is a movie that I think I would have loved if I was, like, 12. But yeah, I just can't really give it a good rating, because it's a mediocre movie, so I will give Five Nights at Freddy's a 2 out of 5. So that's the video. Make sure to like it and subscribe for more. Make sure to turn on notifications, and I will see you guys in the next video.